Have you ever noticed that people who were once very prominent suddenly disappear? A university friend whose achievements everyone admired, a colleague who always spotted what the whole group missed, an old acquaintance with a sharp and distinctive way of thinking that made others respect them. They vanish from everyone's sight. They delete social media. They quit their job without a single explanation. They move to a faraway place, and no one knows how they are living. Not only you, but many people around them once thought they had failed, collapsed, or couldn't handle the pressure. People get curious, worried, and make endless guesses. Where did they go? Are they okay? Or are they avoiding something? But what you think is often not the truth. That disappearance is not a sign of breaking down, but a very natural response from people whose level of awareness is higher than the environment they are living in. The master psychologist of the 20th century, Carl Jung, once said, "When a person sees what the majority cannot see, they will gradually leave places that force them to shrink their thinking. They speak less. They observe more. And before they leave completely, silence is always the first signal to appear." In this article, I will take you through 7 layers of psychological transformation, explaining why intelligent people withdraw from society so quietly, and pay special attention to the 7th layer, where the deepest reason is revealed for why they choose silence and disappearance. Layer 1, the moment they realize they think differently from the crowd. There are moments that seem very ordinary but suddenly make a person realize they no longer move in the same rhythm as before. They sit in a large group, everyone talking animatedly, telling familiar stories. They smile at the right time, respond politely, yet inside, they feel as if they are standing in a different corner of the room. Then, after only a few minutes, they notice their thoughts are moving in a completely different direction. The things everyone is excited to discuss no longer touch them. They are still listening, but they cannot connect. This feeling is not isolation, but the clear sense that they are no longer on the same frequency as the conversation unfolding right in front of them. It is not because the gap in thinking is too large, nor because they are better or worse than anyone in the conversation. It is simply that the way they take things in is slightly different. While everyone is discussing enthusiastically, they notice the small parts the whole group accidentally overlooks, not because they are trying to scrutinize, but because their eyes are used to catching subtle mismatches or details that do not quite fit. Others stop at what they have just heard, but in their mind, the story automatically expands into many more directions. They connect events together, ask different questions, and see possibilities no one at the table has mentioned. This feeling becomes even clearer when someone shares a small story. The crowd reacts simply, but in their mind, many more connections open up. Past experiences, broader perspectives, different questions others have not yet thought of. Many things that end for most people at, "Yes, probably that's it," do not end so easily for them. A small sentence makes them think of several more paths. A slight inconsistency makes them turn the whole issue over again in their head. They keep linking what they see with other experiences, then realize no one in the story reaches the places their thoughts have just touched. That feeling makes them sink slightly, as if standing in the middle of a conversation where what they see has no place to be spoken. Carl Jung once called this a sign of a person separating from the rhythm of the collective unconscious. When someone begins to think in systems, in depth, through tight connections between events, they no longer blend into the habitual way of thinking of the group. They step into a mental space not everyone can walk into with them. Jung said that the alone one is not the one who is left alone, but the one who is different. A person begins to feel lonely, not because there is no one around them, but because the way they think suddenly shifts away from what everyone else is saying. Others stop at the surface of the story, while their mind runs a few steps farther. Just one such moment of being out of sync is enough to create distance, making them feel as if they are somewhere else, even while sitting at the same table with everyone. There was someone who once sat in a meeting, listening as everyone exchanged ideas enthusiastically. Everyone had their own viewpoint and tried to defend it. While the room revolved around those debates, they looked up at the planning board and realized one figure did not match the data from the previous week. Just a small discrepancy. But if left unchanged, the schedule 3 weeks later would be completely off. I once heard this story again from a friend. And to this day, I still remember how they described the feeling. They saw something important that no one noticed. They thought for a few seconds and gently pointed out what they saw. The room paused for exactly 1 beat, then continued returning to the unfinished opinions as if nothing had happened. No one objected, but no one truly welcomed it either. That friend once said the feeling was like throwing a pebble onto the surface of a flat lake, yet the water did not ripple at all. That very moment made them realize they were paying attention to things the whole group did not see, not because they were better, only because their direction of thinking went slightly differently. And when what they saw had no place to fit into the shared conversation, they naturally felt a very clear distance. It seems like this, only I am noticing it. To a doubt, have you ever been in a gathering with friends where, from the moment you sat down, you already felt slightly out of tune with the atmosphere? Everyone talks and laughs enthusiastically, repeats old stories, asks each other familiar questions, but after only a few minutes, you realize you can no longer keep up as before. The repeated topics make it hard for you to focus. You hear everyone talking, but your thoughts drift to what is happening in your own life. Things bigger, more real, or heavier than the dinner table stories that day. Others continue cheerfully, while you just smile politely, as if you are listening with your ears, but inside you are thinking about something else. You sit right in the middle of your close friends, yet feel like an outsider who has stepped into someone else's unfinished conversation. You are still there, but you no longer truly belong to that atmosphere. Not sad, not annoyed, just the feeling that I am no longer on this frequency. When moments like this happen many times, they gradually change the way they appear in conversations. At first, they still try to speak, but then realize that whenever they offer an idea different from the majority, the whole conversation either pauses or shifts to another topic, as if that sentence never existed. Over time, they understand that what they want to share often does not fit the common mood, so they speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they know that if they speak, people either will not understand or will think they are making things too serious. So they choose to listen, nod, smile at the right moments. On the outside, everything looks fine, but inside they are slowly withdrawing from the conversation. And when silence becomes the safest choice, distance begins to grow without anyone intentionally creating it. They are still sitting there, but the feeling of belonging to that conversation fades a little more each time. This silence is not negative withdrawal. It is like someone who cannot find their steps in the common dance, so they slow down to hear their own rhythm more clearly. They do not leave the crowd immediately, but they begin to have inner moments the crowd can no longer enter. They realize they are no longer interested in long debates that go nowhere. They no longer want to join conversations they already know will end with the same worn-out conclusions. Over time, they gradually become someone who stands beside others but does not truly blend in. Not because they are avoiding anything, only because their thoughts seem to be running on a different track. This realization marks the first layer of transformation, a layer that many intelligent people pass through before stepping into deeper changes. This is not departure, but the first moment they realize the world inside them has grown larger than the way society operates on the outside. Have you ever been confused when just one very ordinary sentence of yours made others react more strongly than you expected? Sometimes you only wanted to gently add an idea, yet the other person suddenly startled, paused, or even changed their attitude. Not because you said anything extraordinary, but because the way you saw the matter was different from theirs. That unexpected reaction makes you ask yourself, did I say something wrong? Or did I just touch something they are not ready to look at yet? And in that moment, you realize the first truth. Sometimes, simply by thinking a little farther, you already make the other person feel as if you have touched the boundaries of their defenses. Layer 2, their intelligence accidentally triggers other people's defenses. How many times have you said something completely normal, only for the air around you to suddenly sink right away? You did not mean to attack anyone, you only wanted to clarify a point that was being overlooked. Yet the person in front of you startled or shifted their attitude in a split second. They did not say anything out loud, but their eyes and the way they reacted were enough for you to feel that you had just touched something they did not want to face. Then you start paying closer attention. Sometimes, you offer a very gentle suggestion. and the other person neither disagrees nor agrees. They just hurry to switch to another topic, as if they never heard you. The conversation continues, but you know clearly that the detail you just raised was not ignored because it was small, but because it hit the exact spot that made them put up their protective shield. That feeling makes them uneasy. They do not understand why what they said, even though it was very normal, was received by others as criticism. Sometimes they only ask a question to clarify an issue, yet the whole group suddenly changes its attitude. What they see is not always what others want to hear. Sometimes, right after they speak, the other person's eyes shift. They avoid slightly, or they try to explain in another direction. Those tiny reactions are enough for them to sense that their sentence touched a sensitive place the other person is trying to steer away from. Carl Jung called this phenomenon shadow projection. He once wrote that anything that makes another person unusually uncomfortable often comes from the part they do not dare to look at. When an intelligent person sees what others have not yet realized, that truth is not always thanked. Sometimes it looks like a threat. Someone once confided in me that he asked a very simple question in a meeting. Have we double-checked this data source yet? The room had been very enthusiastic, but after that question, the atmosphere turned tense. One person in the group snapped, "Why do you always doubt everything?" He was surprised because the question carried no attacking intention at all. He only wanted to make sure everything was clear, but the whole group's reaction left him stunned. Did I ask something wrong? I have also witnessed a similar situation. Just one gentle comment that the team was drifting away from the original goal, and the leader immediately changed his attitude. He kept explaining, his voice quicker than usual, as if he were defending something he himself was not fully sure about yet. One simple sentence revealed the anxiety inside that he was trying to hold down. People with sharp intelligence often connect the problem faster. They see the gaps, they see the risks, they see what others miss. But instead of being heard, they make the person across from them feel threatened, not because they talk too much, but because they go straight into the point others are avoiding. And what is being avoided is usually what makes people react the most strongly. Over time, they begin to understand that every time they speak plainly about something, others are not reacting to the words. They are reacting to the feeling of being seen at their weak spot. The sudden silences, the irritated looks, the sharp replies, none of it is actually about them. It comes from the listener's defensiveness. Their intelligence is only a mirror that accidentally reflects the parts others are trying to hide. When this repeats again and again, they begin to change the way they respond. They speak less, not because they run out of ideas, but because they can feel clearly that if they speak, the atmosphere will tighten again like before. Sometimes they see an error, a risk, an inconsistency, but they hold it back, not because they are afraid of anyone, but because they understand the other person is not ready to hear it. They know that if they say it, the other person will feel uncomfortable or offended, and then everything will turn in an unnecessary direction. That feeling leaves inside them a heaviness that is hard to name. It is like they can see what is about to happen, yet have to stand still because saying it would not change anything. And that silent powerlessness exhausts them more than any argument ever could. This does not only happen in meeting rooms. Even in a casual conversation with friends, they have wanted to gently add an idea to prevent a misunderstanding. Yet the other person immediately fires back with a bitter sentence. They stand there and feel clearly that they have just touched the other person's fear or hurt, even though they had no intention of making anyone uncomfortable. A very normal sentence, yet it produces a completely abnormal reaction. The repetition of situations like this makes them start stepping back, not because they lack confidence or are afraid to speak. Before, they used to speak very clearly, offer straightforward feedback, try to point out what was going off track. But every time they did, the atmosphere changed color, others became defensive, and the conversation turned in a direction they did not want. They step back because they understand too well what will happen next. And that exhaustion does not come from the difficulty of speaking, but from the feeling that speaking does not help anyway. They begin to withdraw in a very quiet way. Not withdrawing from the relationship, but withdrawing from the habit of being the one who speaks up whenever something feels off. Before, They tried to correct the direction of the discussion, tried to explain things clearly, but after too many times of speaking and then facing other people's discomfort, they understand that not everyone wants to hear what is right. So they gradually stay silent when a conversation goes too far or becomes tense. There are times they see what is causing trouble, yet they choose to stop before speaking, simply because they know that sentence will make the air heavier. They keep their thoughts to themselves, not because they fear saying the wrong thing, but because they can feel clearly that speaking will only make everything spin into the same familiar loop. Others become defensive, and they become tired. This silence is not weakness at all. It is a sign that they have learned to save their energy for the places that truly need their voice. Carl Jung once said, "People are not upset by the truth. They are upset because the truth touches the place they do not want to look." Intelligent people often receive distance from the people around them. They do nothing wrong. They simply see a little more clearly, and that becomes a burden in ordinary conversations. Have you ever been seen as too blunt just because you could clearly see what others were avoiding? If you have been like that, then believe me, this is not a weakness you need to change. It is only the moment you are standing at a level of awareness where not everyone is standing with you. You do not need to do anything at all. The only thing you should do is listen to your own feeling each time someone reacts too strongly. It is telling you a lot. A strong reaction from the other person does not define who you are. It reflects their fear, their insecurity, or a part inside them they are not ready to face. When you understand this, you naturally become more careful in how you speak. You no longer blurt out the truth by reflex the way you used to. You slow down by one beat. Choose your words more carefully, not because you are wrong, but because you know that even one very normal sentence from you can make someone feel touched in the very place they are trying to avoid. Have you ever been like this? How did you react the next times? More silent, more cautious, or trying to choose your words so no one would feel uncomfortable? And the way you respond to these situations will show you something. Sometimes what exhausts you is having to shrink your thinking to fit the other person's capacity to receive it. Layer 3. They grow tired of having to shrink themselves so others can understand. Life already carries too much pressure. Work, family, school, the things that must be handled every day. But there is another kind of pressure, quieter and rarely mentioned. It is the pressure that comes from one's own words, the pressure of adjusting every sentence so no one feels touched, choosing every word so others feel comfortable, speaking in a way that keeps the conversation from becoming heavy. They still join conversations, still smile, still offer opinions, but inside there is always a part of their thinking they are forced to leave behind, not because they want to appear mysterious or keep distance, but because they know that if they say exactly what they are thinking, the other person may feel confused, offended, or react more strongly than necessary. And so they learn to lower the volume of what is truly happening in their mind. Gradually, they become used to saying only a very small part of what they truly think. When someone talks about a problem, many more perspectives appear in their mind, many more possible solutions. But when they open their mouth, they choose the simplest version so it will be easy to hear. They know that if they say exactly what they are seeing, the conversation will become heavy or make the other person feel examined. I tad too. There are times they hear an opinion and inside they already foresee the risks or consequences that may follow. But instead of analyzing as their instinct would, they nod and let everything pass. Not because they agree, but because they know that if they speak, the air will sink and someone will become defensive again. This feeling is like having to walk more slowly even though you know you could walk faster, just to avoid being out of rhythm with the people around you. Carl Jung once said that, "The persona is the mask we use to exist in society. They no longer want to wear it, but if they take it off, they fear they will become too different. And between these two choices, they choose to remain silent more often, to simplify themselves in order to avoid friction." Try to think of the moment when you are explaining an idea you have thought about very carefully beforehand. You know that in your mind, there are many more layers of information, more connections, more things that could clarify the issue. But when you look around, you realize everyone is only waiting for a short answer to finish the task, not a detailed analysis. so you stop in the middle of your sentence. You cut away the rest. Choose a simpler version to fit the atmosphere of the meeting. Everyone nods, feeling satisfied, and you smile lightly, as if reminding yourself that this time again, you cannot fully say what you are truly thinking. Even though the information you give is accepted by everyone, you still feel that the things you needed to say have not truly been said. That feeling of not being able to say everything does not only happen at work. It follows them into daily life, slipping even into conversations that seem very light. They realize they do not only simplify their thinking in meeting rooms, but also in their most intimate conversations. Friends talk about the future through repeated topics, while they want to speak about deeper, more real things. Seeing the air grow awkward, they stop on their own. They switch to lighter, easier stories to keep the gathering comfortable. After several times like that, they begin to understand that if they want harmony, they must choose things that are just enough for the conversation. And that feeling leaves in them a very clear thought. There are important parts of who I am that have no place to be set down here. I once heard a close older sister share that she felt as if she were living two versions of herself. When she stepped into society, she always spoke gently, kept conversations at a level everyone could easily follow, avoided topics that might make others uneasy. She knew where to stop, what to skip, and how much to simplify, so the atmosphere around her would always remain comfortable. That version helped her blend in, but sometimes made her feel too bland, too well-fitted, compared to what she truly thought inside. The inner version was completely different. That was where she kept deeper thoughts, the things she truly cared about, but rarely had a chance to say. Each time she entered a conversation, she had to consider whether to speak in a way people could easily accept, or to speak exactly what she was thinking. That repeated choice made her tired in a very quiet way. Not because she did not want to share, but because she understood that the truest part of herself did not always have a place to be put into the conversation. There is a kind of tiredness that outsiders cannot easily see. It is not loud. It does not show itself through words. It appears each time they hold back what they want to say, soften their sentence, or smile politely to keep the atmosphere pleasant. They begin to realize they explain more briefly, speak more slowly, and skip many things that they honestly want to go deeper into. Day by day, they feel they must lower the volume of themselves so others will not feel uncomfortable. Then at some point, they understand that what exhausts them is not that their thinking is too deep or too different. It is the constant measuring, the constant shrinking of what they see to fit the capacity of those around them. That tiredness has no sound, but it wears them down slowly, as if they must always control themselves more than is natural, just so no one thinks they are heavy or hard to understand. Over time, this fatigue becomes a quiet distance. They no longer enter conversations with the eagerness they once had. Instead, they observe first, speak later, and sometimes choose silence when they see that space is not meant for their true version. This weariness does not come from others, but from having to perform a part of themselves to keep everything flowing smoothly. Carl Jung once remarked that people do not have a problem with the truth. They have a problem with the version of the truth they are not ready to hear. When they must constantly adjust themselves to avoid making others uncomfortable, they begin to feel that they themselves are being divided into many parts. This is when they look back and see clearly that the social mask has become too tight for what they carry inside. When a person must continuously trim their thoughts so others can receive them more easily, what they say is no longer what they truly want to say. The story becomes thinner, the depth is put away, and the original intention is distorted. The other person hears a brief version, while the core remains inside them. That lack of wholeness gives rise to misunderstandings that are deeply unpleasant. You want to offer feedback clearly, but others think you are criticizing. You try to explain gently, but they think you are avoiding. You simplify so no one feels uncomfortable. Yet that simplification makes the story drift far from its original meaning. The more they try to adjust to fit in, the more they are mistaken for a different kind of person. They are careful and are seen as cold. They speak just enough and are seen as lacking enthusiasm. They hold back to avoid hurting anyone. Yet that very restraint makes them appear distant in the eyes of others. Such misunderstandings, repeated again and again, make their mood sink after every conversation. An incomplete sentence always leads others to a conclusion they never intended to create. And each time they are misunderstood like that, a question quietly appears. If speaking out is misunderstood like this, do I still want to speak anymore? Layer 4. The moment they realize they are so misunderstood that they no longer want to speak. After many times of speaking out and receiving reactions that do not match their intentions, they begin to enter a phase of no longer wanting to explain anymore. Not because they are resentful or giving up, but because they see one thing very clearly. The more they try to clarify, the more everything is misunderstood. At that point, the conversation is no longer a conversation, but becomes a tiring journey of editing, correcting, and watching their meaning distort with every reply. Each time they open their mouth, they prepare themselves for having to explain a few more rounds, and it is precisely that process that slowly drains their desire to share. This moment of falling is not loud, not dramatic. It is like a day when they suddenly realize that they are silent, because continuing to speak will not lead anywhere. Sometimes they answer a question in the simplest way, yet the other person understands it in a completely different direction. They try to explain again, but the more they speak, the farther the original meaning is pushed away. In the end, the conversation drifts to a topic they never intended to mention. A small mistake they point out to save the whole group, but the response they receive is an annoyed look and the line, "You're nitpicking again?" In a crowded room, they stand there and feel themselves pushed into a position they never wanted to fall into. There is a truth that people do not react to someone's words. They react to the fear echoing inside themselves. They hear the words, but they understand them through what they are worried about. They hear feedback, but they feel it as criticism. And this misalignment does not come from the content, but from the listener's emotions. Carl Jung once said that what makes others uncomfortable is often the part they have not dared to look at. For people with sharp intuition and quick minds, they often see problems a little earlier, but that very thing unintentionally makes others feel exposed. Not because they speak wrongly, but because they touch a point the other person is not ready to face. In a meeting, have you ever witnessed this? A colleague simply asks a very simple question. If we wait until next week to check again, will it be too late? Everyone is chatting cheerfully, but that question makes the atmosphere sink. Someone in the group immediately replies in an irritated tone. The whole room shifts, as if that person has just dropped the spirit of the meeting. While what they said was only to prevent a risk, the reaction they receive is as if they had caused trouble. What makes them sad is not being opposed, but the feeling that they say something very simple, and yet it is received with a completely different meaning. They listen to the response and realize that the version being sent back to them has nothing to do with what they intended to convey, as if their sentence has been bent in a direction they cannot control. Conversations thus become heavy in a way that is very hard to explain, not because of conflict and not because of tense content. What exhausts them is the feeling of constantly having to reassure others that I have no bad intention. I am not trying to pressure you. They finish speaking and then must correct themselves. They finish explaining and then must deny what the other person assumed. And after too many rounds like that, they find themselves protecting their original intention more than actually being able to say what is truly in their mind. An old classmate once told me about a working coffee meeting with her partner. The meeting went quite smoothly until she suggested that the current pace might cause the campaign to miss its deadline. She said it very gently, only so both sides could adjust in time. But the partner immediately changed their tone, explaining rapidly as if she were questioning their competence. Her words were twisted into another meaning, while her original goodwill disappeared among the other person's defenses. When the meeting ended, she sighed and told me that what made her saddest was not the unpleasant attitude, but the feeling that, no matter how I speak, I am always understood in another direction. Everyone it. In moments like that, the dialogue begins to break in an unwanted way. You say a sentence, you think is harmless, but the other person freezes for a second. A very slight frown, a breath heavier than usual, or a reply that touches you more than necessary. All of these are signals that make you understand your words have just touched their most sensitive place. And then you feel yourself sink. You did not intend to make anyone uncomfortable, and you certainly did not think that sentence would create such a reaction. You ask yourself, where did I say something wrong? Where did I say something wrong? Even though inside you know very clearly that your intention was completely pure. That moment is what tires you. Not because of argument, but because of the feeling that you accidentally touched something the other person did not want to hear, even though you had no way of knowing beforehand. The old classmate I mentioned also fell into that feeling. After the coffee meeting with the client, she sat in her car and asked herself, am I not suited for this job? Even though she knew her professional skills were very strong, one part of her wanted to say the important truths, but another part whispered, or maybe next time I should just let everything pass to keep it light. I.ment. And so, in later meetings with partners, she always tried to adjust the way she spoke to be as gentle as possible. She chose her words more carefully, limited direct comments, and kept the conversation at the safest level she could. But in those moments, she began to realize something that made her heart sink. What she was saying no longer resembled what she truly thought. She heard her voice soften, but that softness was not refinement. It was fear of making others uncomfortable. She shortened her sentences to avoid strong reactions, but that shortening made her meaning drift far from what she wanted to convey. She tried to avoid important ideas so as not to touch the other person's emotions. But the more she avoided, the more she felt the distance between herself and the conversation widen. That was what tired her the most. The feeling that every time she opened her mouth, she had to edit herself. She no longer spoke in her real voice, but in a version edited so no one would be offended. And when she had to repeat that too many times, she gradually lost the desire to share or to meet that client again. She was not silent because she had no ideas, but because she saw clearly that her ideas, once spoken, were very hard to keep in their original shape. When people no longer want to be misunderstood again, they choose silence. Not silence because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer believe that what they say can keep its original shape when it reaches another person's ears. Some people even told me they stay silent to preserve the small peace they still have for themselves. They are exhausted from having to explain good intentions in spaces that do not want to listen. Have you ever experienced that feeling? That feeling of sinking by one beat, hard to put into words, and not knowing what to do next except remain silent. However, everyone reacts differently. Some people choose more silence to avoid being misunderstood, but others reach a limit where they can no longer pretend. They feel clearly that if they keep speaking gently, lightly, and in shortened versions, they are betraying what they truly think. That moment is like a very small crack, but once it appears, they can never return to who they used to be. And before moving on to the fifth layer, we would like to thank you for accompanying us to the halfway point of this video. In every moment, we can learn and grow, and the fact that you are here, listening and reflecting with us, is a great gift that I cherish every minute. To help us spread these valuable lessons to more people, please press like and share this video. Every share you make is a small action with deep meaning, just like the lessons Carl Jung left behind. And do not forget, the fifth layer is waiting for you in the next part. Let us continue to explore and receive these timeless insights together. Once again, thank you for your companionship. Layer 5, the collapse of the social mask. Prolonged silence leads them to begin looking back at themselves in a very honest way. Not the kind of looking into a mirror to fix their hair or straighten their clothes, but the first time they truly see how far they have lived away from their real feelings. After too many times choosing their words, holding back their thoughts, trying to keep the peace, they suddenly realize they have become used to adjusting themselves to fit other people's expectations. They feel tired. Tired because every time they appear somewhere, they have to think about how to speak, how to smile, how to react in a way that pleases everyone. They want to be comfortable with others, but they forget to be comfortable with themselves. Like one morning when they look into the mirror and suddenly find their face looking unfamiliar. Not because their appearance has changed, but because they clearly see the strain in their own eyes. A person trying to look okay, instead of a person who is truly okay. That moment makes them freeze. A little sad. They understand. They have been living as if they had to play a role everywhere, to the point that they have forgotten what their real self even looks like. There is a story about Robin Williams that still makes many people stop and think. He once shared that there were days when he made millions of people laugh. But when he returned to the dressing room and looked into the mirror, he asked himself, "Why do I laugh so much? When inside, I feel no joy at all." That moment made him stop short, not because he acted poorly, but because he realized something more frightening. He had become so used to pretending to be okay that even he could no longer tell which joy was real and which joy was meant for the audience. He once said that the stage lights helped him escape from the dark places inside, but the longer he hid, the more he lost touch with his real emotions. Not that he was unhappy, but that he no longer knew what his own happiness looked like. And the line that touches the deepest is this: "Out there I make people laugh, but in the mirror, I only see someone trying not to fall apart." His story is not told to speak of sadness, but to show something very real. Even people loved by the whole world can lose themselves in the roles they must perform every day. Carl Jung once said that, "We become what we pretend to be for too long." When living according to society's expectations, the role they create in order to blend in gradually becomes the face everyone recognizes. But when the inside can no longer accept that, they encounter a break that is very hard to describe. That is when they realize they have suppressed themselves too much. They agree to things they do not truly want. They accept helping when they no longer have strength. They nod at opinions that do not fit, just so no one feels uncomfortable. They smile at words that hurt them. Little by little, they move away from the truest version of themselves. When someone praises them, "You are always strong. You never get tired," while they know clearly they are exhausted. Or when a loved one says, "You live so comfortably. I never see you sad." Those words that sound like compliments make them startle. It turns out the image people see is not the image of the real person, and they themselves helped create that because they stayed silent at the moments when they needed to speak honestly. A friend of mine once told me that she joined a group meeting. Everyone said she was calm, pleasant, someone who never made others uncomfortable. But the moment she left the meeting, she burst into tears in the restroom. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because she felt like an empty shell. "I am so agreeable that I have lost my own real opinion." Not rebellion, not resistance, but the moment they realize they have disappeared inside their own life. This realization leaves them disoriented for a while. They no longer know which version is real and which version is meant to please others. But that very confusion opens a new door. Then they begin to ask themselves, if I no longer have to try to please anyone, how do I truly want to live? That is the quiet but most powerful turning point. It marks the beginning of the journey back to themselves. No declarations, no immediate changes, just stopping long enough to feel what in this life truly belongs to them. If you begin to recognize yourself here, when the image you show outside no longer matches the feeling inside, pause for a moment. You do not need to change right away. Just look clearly at the moments when you had to shrink yourself. When that realization grows large enough, you will understand why you are so tired and why it is time to live more honestly with yourself. Layer 6. They find peace when they step away from the noise. When they begin to clearly see how much they have been shrinking themselves for so many years, the first thing that appears is not anger or blame, but a very simple desire to be at peace, to breathe without having to brace themselves, to live without having to perform, explain, or prove anything. That feeling leads them into a new phase, a phase in which silence becomes the most natural refuge. There, they realize they speak less, not because they have nothing left to say, but because they finally understand that their body and mind need rest after many years of stretching themselves to become an acceptable version. Open. In that quiet, they begin to notice something very real. When they no longer have to listen to awkward feedback, no longer have to guess whether the other person is uncomfortable, no longer have to think about how to speak, so it will be just right. Their body feels more at ease. No more tightening in the chest each time they open their mouth. No more tension in the shoulders from watching other people's reactions. No more noise in the mind reminding them to be careful with every word. Oh, I have. Just stepping away from those spaces for a little while, they feel so light that even they are surprised. Light in the way you feel when you finally set down a heavy backpack you have been carrying for many years, so long that you forgot it was heavy, and that very moment makes them startle. So this is how tense I have been living all this time without even knowing it. As a ceiling, an old colleague once told me that after a long period of feeling exhausted, he decided to leave the city for a few days without telling anyone, simply going to a place where no one knew him, no one asked what he was doing, and no one required him to explain anything. He said it was the first time in many years that his mind no longer had to stay on guard or prepare answers for any situation. He just sat down, breathed, and felt himself return to a very natural rhythm. In silence, they realize more than they expect. They realize that for many years, they have been reacting more than living. Always afraid that what they say will be misunderstood, always having to anticipate other people's emotions, always worrying that someone might be dissatisfied. Silence does not make them lonely. It makes one thing very clear. So peace is a feeling I have not touched for a very long time. Age. Carl Jung once spoke of individuation as a journey inward to see who one truly is. At this stage, they begin to understand that line. When the noise outside fades, the inner voice finally has a chance to be heard. They do not change environments to escape. They are only creating space to heal the parts of themselves that have been worn down. Like lying down at night and realizing they no longer need to think about whom they must talk to tomorrow, how they must choose their words, how much they must adjust themselves. Their mind, so used to running without rest, finally allows itself to stop. Have you ever heard of Emma Watson, who once shared that she was exhausted not because of artistic work, but because of having to maintain a perfect image every time she appeared in public? In one interview, Emma said she only felt true relief when she temporarily stepped away from the media, stopped attending events, and lived alone in silence for several weeks. She said, "What tired me was not the packed schedule. What tired me was carrying a version of Emma that everyone expected me to be." And when she spent time slowing down, with no one asking, no one expecting, no one watching how she behaved, she realized, I had tried to look okay for so long that I forgot how light truly being okay feels. And strangely enough, it was those quiet stretches that allowed her energy to return in a very natural way. No forcing, no straining, no fighting, simply returning to her own rhythm. Many people said that Emma disappeared, but those who understand her know she did not disappear from life. She only stepped away from the noise in order to live more truthfully as herself. During the time away from noise, they begin to hear small signals from within. When they are anxious, when they are trying to please someone, when they are abandoning their true feelings. This awareness does not require effort. It arrives naturally when no one is forcing them to hold themselves together anymore. This creates a very large difference from those who never go through this quiet stage. Those who keep forcing themselves to run, to brace, to keep being okay, often reach a point where emotions and thoughts begin to tangle completely. The mind feels like standing in a room full of clutter without knowing where to start cleaning. Emotions gather into a heavy mass in the chest that cannot be named. Some days they feel suspended, touching nothing, unable to hold on to anything inside. That confusion is not because they are weak, but because they have never allowed themselves to rest long enough for their emotions to be placed back where they belong. Those who enter silence, sooner or later, find something they could never find while still in the noise. Natural balance. Not everyone understands this stage. Some look at them and think they are avoiding life. Some think They are losing motivation. But only they know that this is the first time they have chosen themselves instead of choosing a role. Are you longing for a place where no one asks you to become anything? If the answer is yes, come with us to the journey of the next layer and join the conversation in the comments below. We truly look forward to hearing your story. Layer 7, they do not disappear. They return to their true self. When the outside noise settles and they have enough space to live according to their true rhythm, a very natural change begins to appear. Not a moment of sudden illumination, but a transformation born from many days in which they no longer have to defend themselves, no longer have to explain, no longer have to keep themselves pleasant enough. From those quiet days, they no longer want to prove anything. In the past, every time they were misunderstood, they tried to correct it. Every time they were labeled, they tried to explain. But after passing through enough exhaustion, that need naturally falls away. Not because they give up, but because they understand something important. Their emotions, their boundaries, their values do not need anyone's confirmation in order to exist. And it is precisely this feeling of not needing to prove that creates a calm they have never had before. At this stage, they begin to live according to their own pace, needs, and limits. They choose silence when silence is needed, speak when they truly want to speak, and decline conversations that only leave them feeling empty. This withdrawal is not a loss of connection, but the removal of connections that make them lose themselves. What once made them feel guilty now becomes something they cherish. The right to live in their own rhythm. Jung once spoke of the self as the stage in which a person reunites the parts that were divided throughout the journey of growing up. When they enter this layer, that feeling comes very naturally. No more struggle between what I think and what others expect of me. No more shielding of the persona, what they say, what they do, what they decide. All align in a way that makes them feel far more at ease than ever before. Someone I know once described this stage like this: I live more simply, but I feel deeper. In the past, they shared a great deal, explained a great deal, the destrifier well, always wanted others to understand what they were thinking. But the more they matured, the more they realized a gentle truth. What truly matters to them does not need to be spoken too much. They do what they believe, live by the values they hold, and no longer seek nods of approval from others. When they step into this stage, the way they appear before life changes very clearly. They no longer accept every meeting, every appointment, every event, as they once did, not because they fear contact or want to isolate themselves, but because they begin to sense precisely which places make them comfortable, which places make them tense, and they choose to save their energy for safer spaces. In those spaces where they feel safe, they relax in a very natural way. They do not need to choose every sentence to avoid making someone uncomfortable. They do not need to cut down their thoughts to fit others. They do not need to hide the depth within them for fear of being misunderstood. There, they speak slowly, think slowly, and live according to their true rhythm. Gently, simply, without trying to become an acceptable version. A once very famous but always private artist once confided that after many years of living according to the audience's expectations, she felt as if she had split into two. One part was her real self. The other was the version the crowd wanted to see. Only when she stepped away from the stage lights, slowed down, and lived a very ordinary life did she realize, it is not that I hate crowds. I hate the version of myself when I stand before crowds. 2. That sentence perfectly describes the feeling of those who reach this layer. The feeling of no longer wanting to maintain any image other than themselves. That is also why you see many people in the arts suddenly choose to leave the stage, choose peace, or choose a life so simple that few know where they are. They do not disappear from life. They are only returning to the true person they once lost in the noise. They begin to feel the power of simplicity, a quiet morning, a cup of coffee alone, a piece of work done with full attention. Small things like these suddenly make life feel clearer. No more feeling of being pulled somewhere. No more feeling of having to chase expectations. everything returns to its rightful place. And so do they. When they speak less, they listen to themselves more. When they step away from places that exhaust them, they open space for what truly matters to enter. When they stop seeking validation, they find the peace they had always lacked. This is the deepest turning point. They return to their true nature, quietly, but powerfully. This return is not loud. Outsiders may think they are withdrawing, avoiding society, hard to approach. But those who have passed through this stage understand. They have not disappeared. They are returning to the part of themselves they once forgot while living too many roles. And it is precisely this return that makes them stronger, clearer, steadier. Some people say that at this layer, they no longer care what others think of them. But that is not entirely true. They still care, but it no longer decides how they live. They choose lightness, choose truth, choose themselves. And from those choices, they find the calm they had always longed for, without knowing where to find it. This is the time they feel most whole, not because they have more, but because they no longer have to lose anything in the process of living. What they keep is real. The people they choose to keep close are real, and the version they are becoming is also real. Are you ready to return to your true self? If you have reached this final layer, I believe that something inside you has begun to shift. Perhaps very small, very faint, but it is pulling you back toward the person you once forgot while being too busy pleasing the world. Or at the very least, by reading this far, you have seen more clearly what you once only sensed vaguely, that the disappearance of intelligent people is not retreat, but return. When looking back at the entire journey, we can clearly see that these 7 layers are not only about intelligent people, but about anyone who has ever felt the need to shrink themselves in order to survive in a noisy society. The first layer begins with a very small kind of exhaustion, being out of rhythm with the crowd. Then comes the moment they realize their intelligence accidentally makes others defensive. After that is the stage of speaking less, compressing themselves so everyone else can feel comfortable. Then the misunderstandings repeat enough times that they no longer want to speak anymore. Layer 5 opens a painful but liberating truth. They have lived too long to please others. Layer 6 is as gentle as a deep breath. They rediscover peace and silence. And layer 7 is when they return to themselves, without noise, without declarations, simply living in their true rhythm. This is not a journey of disappearance, but a journey of awakening. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The greatest privilege of a human life is to become one's true self. And sometimes, in order to do that, we are forced to step away from the noise that does not belong to us. If these layers touch something inside you, stay. The journey of returning to the true self is never only once. There are still many inner doors inside you waiting to be opened, one by one, at the exact rhythm your soul is ready for. And if you want to continue exploring what Jung left behind for the world, subscribe so you will not miss any of the journeys that come next.